Okay. Oh, sorry to hear that. Still 12:59.
Way to go, Colin. That was pretty speedy there.
Boy, that's a very long minute.
I know. It's. I find that too.
Lock, what's that? Go away.
Okay. I'd like to call this meeting to order. It's Committee of the Whole today, and we'll begin with our Aboriginal acknowledgement. The City of Nelson acknowledges all Aboriginal peoples on whose traditional territories we stand. We honor their connection to the land and rivers and respect the importance of the environment to our strength as a community. We're going to begin today with the introduction of several new staff members. Let's see here. So Pam, are you here? Yeah, there you are. Would you like to go ahead?
So I'd like to introduce our new senior planner, this is Sebastian Arcan.
Please bring him up here so we can see him on
Yeah.
Parade around.
There he is. There he goes.
So Sebastian will be working with us 3 days a week. He comes from Moncton, New Brunswick, where he's been applying for the last 10 years. There we go. Oh, there we go. So he has a great range of planning experience, which we're really happy about. He's done the Moncton Downtown Master Plan, he's done climate change studies, he's done lots of land use policy and bylaw work, so we're thrilled that he has decided to make Nelson his home. He's going to be a great addition to our team, so we're happy. Yay.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And Colin McClure will be standing in for Colin Innes to introduce another person.
Yeah, so come on up.
You have to go to the other side where the camera's
And you can stand over there, yeah.
Anyway, it's my privilege to introduce you all to Craig Stanley, who has come to us from High River, Alberta. He has great experience in dealing with parks and has a number of years doing that. And I think it was because the flooding, they were expecting more flooding, and he moved here because there was at least the lake that became too flooding, so he wanted to help us. Yes. But he's been working in the public works, in the parks division for quite a while in a number of different areas in Port St. John and in High River. But he also is no stranger to the Kootenays in that he also was out at Copenhagen Springs. Am I correct on that? That's correct. Yeah, Copenhagen Springs, being their groundsperson back in the day in the golfing. And it's also been a help. So great addition. It's been great to know him and see some of the ideas that he has for parks, because we have great, I think, world-class parks, and it's fantastic that we have some of this sort of experience to join our team.
Great.
Thanks, well done. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Sebastian and Craig. Thanks. Just before we get into our agenda, I'm going to point out that the City of Nelson has its 2017 annual report has been released. So lots of really great information in there. You can get it online as well. So have a look at that. And next we have our cultural presentation.
Don't worry, we do
meetings.
the business first.
Oh, we want to do the business, okay.
Minutes.
Any late items to be added to the agenda? No. Do I have a mover for the agenda, please? Thank you, Councillor Morrison and Mayor Kozak, as seconder. All in favor? Great. And the adoption of previous meetings. Committee of the Whole, May 2018.
So moved.
Councillor Morrison and Councillor Purcell, all in favor? Perfect. Okay, and now it's the cultural presentation. Thanks. Joy Barrett from the Cultural Development Committee will come forward. Introduce them.
Good afternoon. Ella Korth and Talal McBriar started playing together 4 years ago, and since then have combined their passion for music to form a duo of harmonizing and instrumentals. Raised in Nelson, both girls have a strong connection with music. Ella, who plays guitar, banjo, and mandolin, has grown up in a musical household and has played music all her life. Talal has grown up playing classical piano and within the past 4 years has started playing guitar and singer-songwriting. Inspired by genres such as folk, swing, jazz, and bluegrass, the two have a keen interest in various types of music. They play old and contemporary folk songs as well as their own originals. Ella and Talal are passionate about how music has the ability to make people feel various emotions and aim to learn more about the world's variety of music. They were recently awarded with the Kootenai Music Award for Best Roots Song and also recently played at the Tiny Lights Music Festival. Welcome, Ella and Talal.
Yeah, come on up here.
Come up here.
Thank you for having us.
You can come right
Yep,
back.
yep, come right
Yeah, right up.
I'm Talal, but I'm Ella, and we're gonna first play a song that I wrote last October, and it's called October. And this is the song that we played for the
Oh, cool.
I'm caught up in the spider's web, it's cast its nose in the sky. The smoke is sweet, the leaves are red, the winter
was great.
Thank you very much, Ella Korth and Talal McBriar. I could listen to you two all afternoon, actually. That's great. Thank you. We are now at the the public participation portion of our meeting. So is there anyone who would like to come forward? Seeing no hands. No one wants to speak today? Okay. Oh. So one moment. I'll read in that case the rules for public participation. City Council's welcomes comments from the public on issues it is dealing with or on other issues of interest to the public. Before speaking, please identify yourself, state your name and place of residence and the issue you are bringing forward. Please limit your questions and comments to a maximum of 5 minutes. Council will not make any decisions on the issue you raise, but may refer the item to staff for follow-up. Topics raised should be of broad public interest. Complaints of a personal nature will be dealt with by staff through the city's established process. And thank you for taking the time to participate. Yes, please come forward, John.
Hi, John Alton. I just wanted to comment about Airbnbs. Is this the time to do it?
You could comment now. Yes.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm just concerned about Airbnbs. I'm understanding there's lots of people, I know lots of people having a difficult time finding rental. And so I'm concerned what's happening in the town with Airbnbs taking over some of the rentals. And I'm wondering about how the city's dealing with some of the rules around this. I understand people have to live in the house that they're doing Airbnbs. And it's come to my attention that there's people getting around those rules, and I wonder how the city deals with enforcement. What would stop a couple from claiming two residents, one in each residence? How is that? How would the city track that? How would they find out if that's happening? Because a friend I know said that is happening. So I'm just wondering, because I'm concerned that houses are being bought, people are being, tenants are being evicted, and then turning it into a temporary rental. So, yeah, what's stopping people from doing that, from claiming two residents? If they're living common law, they could get a tax break on 2 places. So I'm concerned about people getting around the rules.
Thank you. On our agenda today is a year-end review of the rules we put in place last year. So definitely some of these things have come to our attention, so that will be discussed later today in this meeting.
Okay.
Thank you for
Yeah,
your
Just as a question too, though, whenever people are deceptive or devious, it's not always that we're going to catch them, right? So one has to always be cognizant of the fact that when people do behaviors that are against the rules, we may not have the capacity to be able to follow that up. Now, again, if someone, where a lot of these things come from are complaint-based in the city, and so if someone knows of knowledge of that, that is likely the best way for us to find out about things is when people say this isn't right or somebody is doing this. We don't have either resources to go through every single place where someone's are bending the rules. And again, sometimes when they bend the rules, they might be bending the rules, but they could be inside the rules. Again, if I'm common law, but I own a house and you own a house and we're common law, there's different ways. You can say, yes, I own this house. I claim the homeowner grant on that. So again, it's difficult to do that. But just always to be clear when people are doing activities that are outside of the rules, we would do our best, but there may not be the ability or resources to actually catch all.
Right. Yeah, I understand. Okay. Thanks.
So stick around for our conversation later, John.
Okay. When will that be?
Soon.
Okay.
Soon.
Very soon.
Second item.
Any other public participation? Comments from the public? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to our agenda. We have 2 delegations today. The first is regarding green burials. And just let me get my notes up here. Okay. So Lily Mayall is a representative of the Nelson End of Life Society, and she's here to present information regarding green burials to council. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm here on behalf of the Nelson End of Life Society, and this is a new organization that started a couple of years ago. We've got we're shifting our relationship around death in Nelson. So we have death doulas, and we have a threshold choir that sing people across at the end of their life. We have our Good to Go package. We're providing options and alternatives for people. And one of the initiatives that we'd like to do is provide the option of a green burial in our community. So how do I do this? Push the next button.
The down arrow key.
There we go. Okay, so just to introduce green burials, the whole concept started in England in the 1990s and soon shifted to North America, where it quickly spread. And it's driven by the baby boomers, who are very conscious and aware and wanting to be environmentally sensitive with their remains. So lessen their footprint on the environment. At present, 60 to 70% of us in Canada are cremated. And along with that comes a huge amount of energy that's consumed. So apparently it takes enough energy to drive a car across Canada to consume one body, not to mention all the off-gassing and the particulate matter that's put into the atmosphere. So, and then we have our conventional burials, which add thousands of gallons of formaldehyde to the ground every year with the embalming fluid that's used, not to mention tons of concrete and steel that are added to the ground. And we know with our cemetery here, there's a very costly maintenance situation with mowing and herbicides, pesticides, and fertilizers, and weed eating, etc. So the Green Burial Society of Canada has 5 criteria for a green burial. And these are, first of all, no embalming of the body, so no use of formaldehyde. It's a direct earth burial, so people are put into the ground in either a biodegradable box, made of wood, no plywood or anything that has glue or too much hardware in it, or a direct earth burial in a shroud, so fabric that's natural, okay? And then communal memorialization is another one that's, what that means is that there's no individual demarcation on the grave. There's no individual grave markers. So instead of that, for instance, in Royal Oak Cemetery, which has a green burial section, they have a large boulder in the area where there's a green burial, and the people who are interred there are inscribed on the boulder. Yeah, we have to wrap our heads around that one. Whoops, okay. The ecological restoration that happens after that is that about a year's time after the burial, it's planted with indigenous trees and shrubs and ground covers that are, it's a bigger plan for the whole area. So it's not just, individually, there's a plan for how that's going to look in the long run. So optimization of land use. And the Green Burial Society of Canada has 4 categories, ranging from the greenest option to the least green option. And we're suggesting category 2. It's part of your addendum. You will have seen it there. And I'm not going to go into all that, but you can explore it. But that's what we're suggesting we go towards. And I've spoken to Colin Innes from Public Works. He's very on board with this whole idea and suggests an area that we can use for green burials. It's between the railway and the present cemetery. Now we have an issue because our bylaw number 6.5 precludes green burials, and that's because it requires a vault above every grave, a fiberglass vault, which costs $450 or something like that. So it's just part of our bylaw, and every interment is requiring a vault above it. And of course, it's fiberglass; it doesn't biodegrade, so it's there forever. So we were really fortunate, and I discovered Eric Lees, who was the past president of the Green Burial Society of Canada. And in fact, some of you who have been here for a while may know him. He worked for Public Works in Nelson, just so happened. He's now got his own landscape architect company. It's a planning company, and he's got this company in Vancouver. He's the past president of the Green Burial Society of Canada, and he knows our situation really, really well. So he's been incredibly valuable resource for me. And in fact, he supplied he was hired by the Lakeside Cemetery in Penticton to alter their bylaws so that they could accommodate green burials there. And he provided us with the section of the Penticton bylaw that accommodates green burials in the cemetery. And that's included in your addendum there. Yeah, he's been very generous and he's very helpful with all of this. I just wanted to show you, I was in Victoria in the spring. This is their green burial section. Kind of it's being used. So those are the first interments in the green burial, and it's a sequential situation, so you don't actually buy a specific plot. You buy an opportunity to be buried in that area because the people are buried sequentially as they die, right? So whoever comes next gets buried next, and then in a year's time, the planting of indigenous species happens. That is I don't know if I can make it any bigger. Nope. Oh, wait. There, I thought I could perhaps make it bigger, but that's the boulder that's inscribed with all the people who are in that area. Just simple names. And then that's after a couple of years, that's what it looks like, and there's a pathway through, but it's just all natural planting. It's really quite beautiful and natural, and it's integrated into the surrounding landscape. So thank you. I appreciate your attention and your interest, hopefully, in this whole initiative. And just wanted to say that we have presented this at the Learning in Retirement and other places. We had a town meeting at the library, and we had a big turnout. We presented at various facilities here, and there's an awful lot of interest. And we have spoken to people who are actually, have terminal illnesses, and they want to be buried in a green cemetery. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mayall. If you'd wait a moment, there may be some questions from council. Council? Well, I have a question. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Morrison.
I have a question. That's in terms of the fact that you talked about no headstones or memorials all these days. Is there somewhere then located before you enter this area a listing of names, or is it just somewhere that I would know that my loved one was and I would just walk through and enjoy the beauty? Like, would there be a historical record? Because I know, like, at our cemetery currently, we have a very good historical record. We have a cemetery tour. In fact, I don't know if we still have the brochures, but that was very popular for a time there. And it is interesting to know at least the names of the people that were there. And
Yes, and so all cemeteries keep a list of who's buried there, right? And I think the idea is that the area is a memorial to the people who are interred there. So we're trying to get away from the specific site of individual people. And the cemetery does know where the people are buried. They keep track of that.
Right.
However, I'm pretty sure that you sign a waiver that the remains will never have to be exhumed. Is that the
Yes.
word? Yeah.
Because you reuse the same land.
And down the road, that's the idea, that it will be reused. Yeah.
so there would be a listing, though, before you enter that area where you could see the names of everybody
Well, that's what the memorial stone is,
Okay.
right? And on that, yeah, it's a marker with everybody's names who are in that area, but you don't know where Granny is
Right.
precisely.
Councillor Purcell and then Kozak.
Well, and I in the agenda package, I thought I noticed that, like you said, there was a few different types of green burials
That's right.
and one of them does, and there was a list of criteria that you had to choose a bunch of, eight of, but you could have individual memorial markers as long as they are unobtrusive to the landscape and kind of, like, I thought that was an option in one of them, but maybe that was the least green one.
Well, even the least green one, yeah. I mean, we're hoping in our Nelson Cemetery that we go for communal memorialization. And it's something that we have to wrap our heads around. And I was talking to my sister and we just went like, you know, in 100 years, nobody remembers me specifically, and nobody is looking for me in that cemetery. I mean, maybe they are, but we have to let go of our attachment to knowing exactly where we are. And this is the whole concept. We're greening, we're going back to the land with ourselves, right? It's our final parting gift. Return ourselves to the land. I understand your concern. It's something that's a lot of people really want.
Yeah.
A specific place they want to know where that person is, you know?
Yeah, or even just express a little bit of their unique self in what the stone looks like or how their name is represented. Like it
Right.
feels like it's, you know, something that whether people know who they were or not, it's, you know, something that lasts or something. I just noticed, the memorial, if permitted, memorial will be preferably in the form of communal, but if individuals are permitted, they must be minimally intrusive on the landscape and made from locally sourced materials. So
Yeah, like a piece of wood that perhaps will, but really minimal. Yeah.
Mayor Kozak.
Thanks. I was just watching a documentary on some older people who have got a bit of a social club going, and you've probably watched it too, where they're building their own coffins.
I saw that.
And they're using them as, they're personalizing them and use them as home furnishings and stuff before.
It's a coffee table.
And I thought that was kind of refreshing, and the entire project got people to come to a central place and interact and socialize and normalize what we here in North America don't necessarily think of as a natural process of life. It's life and death, and I thought it was a healthy expression of that. What about bears and what about predators? Would the area be? What did Mr. Lees have to say about that?
About digging up the remains, you're
Yeah.
concerned about that?
Yep.
It's not happened, and it's apparently it's a non-issue, because we did there were a couple of questions. One was that, and one was the spread of disease if you don't have a vault cover or something, fiberglassing. Those were the two things. And he said that they're non-issues. They're definitely things that we can look into. There are many, just to let you know, many small communities in British Columbia right now are going for a section of green burial. So we're not the only ones. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. This is being addressed
They might
everywhere.
not be in grizzly habitat though, like in Penticton.
In Penticton, no, but there is, I mean, even Creston, a lot of the outlying areas are looking into it. So we're
That's an
not the only
interesting
ones, Kimberly, yes.
Yeah, I think it would be an important thing to consider, just to make doubly sure, because it would be terribly distressing for family members if
Well,
that
for
were to
sure.
happen. So I think
Absolutely.
it's something that we need to consider. I'd like to refer this to staff for further investigation and possible recommendation. I don't know if we'll get to it this term, but I think that it's well worth looking at. So I'd like to do that.
I'll second it. Thank you, Councillor Purcell, for seconding. All in favor?
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And hope your arm heals well.
Try to fast forward my interment, I guess.
My goodness. We have one more item on today's agenda, and that is a review of our short-term vacation rental policy and actions. Thank you. You're going to do a presentation, Alex? Alex from our billing department. Councillor Morrison?
Councillor Purcell, I wish to declare at this time that I am not entitled to participate in this discussion of the next business item 9B, I believe it is, by reason of perceived conflict of interest, and therefore I wish to leave the meeting at this time and request that the minutes record my leaving the meeting for the reason cited.
You are recused. I am Councillor Warmington.
It's quiet.
Councillor
Purcell.
Purcell.
Oh, God. It's catchy. That's got started and now it doesn't stop. Oh.
Okay.
All right, good to go. Good afternoon. So I'd like to first go through a little bit of the overview of what we have again and where we came from regarding the short-term rental regulations before getting into what we found out in the last couple of months through both a public survey and a license holder survey. And then finally, let's actually talk some policy. So you should have these slides in your packages as well too, but they should be up on the screen right away as well. So the principles that we went into back in 2016 into short-term rental regulation with were these three here: ensuring a level playing field amongst accommodators from the hotels, hostels, motels, through to bed and breakfasts, and this short-term rental category as well. Ensuring safe accommodation for people coming, as well as our local housing needs. But the other sort of sub-principles as well too that that we looked at that time were enforceable rules, which was quite the anomaly, I guess, at that time in 2015, 2016. A number of cities were regulating short-term rentals, but it was very difficult to enforce on. And in terms of helping us enforce, maximizing voluntary compliance, so that we can achieve principle number one as well too, that there's a level playing field, not only between different types of accommodation, but between short-term rental operators as well too, that you don't have half of people getting a license and going through the hoops and other half don't. So that's part of what made Nelson's approach rather unique. A quick overview then of what these current regulations are. So we have a cap of 110 annual licenses, 40 summer licenses, as well as a cap of no more than 3 per block. For all our annual licenses, which are the vast majority of licenses that we've issued so far, there's this principal residency requirement in terms of, to follow up as well too on the intervention earlier as well too. We'll talk a little bit about that in terms of enforcement of that and compliance with that in a bit. There's a parking requirement as well too, depending on the type. We have the different categories of short-term rentals, and no matter which category we're talking about, even if you're just renting out one guest room, there's always that requirement to have one parking space. And if you're talking about an entire guest home, or R1, we're looking at 2, etc. So there's no way as of right to have no parking spaces, off-street parking spaces offered as part of a short-term rental. We also require a building inspection every 3 years. So we haven't got to that 3-year mark yet, but obviously at the time of application, every license holder that has gone through that building inspection against the building code, the current building code specifically, of course. And we also have this information on where short-term rentals are and contact information too publicly available. That was the best practice that was taken from other cities where, that I guess Nelson is as much of a party city as perhaps other cities are, but other cities' experiences where, you have a residential area, there's guests coming over, perhaps the owners aren't actually there on site, at least during the guest stay, and the neighbor wants someone to contact instead of going directly to police or bylaw enforcement. So that information is available online. There are a number of different categories that we have. We have the annual licenses, we have the summer licenses, and we also have a 31 consecutive day license as well. So they're broken down into categories of guest home, which is a primary dwelling unit, usually a single detached home, which is the same category as a guest suite, which is specifically a conforming secondary suite. And going through just a one guest room, sort of your conventional sort of bed and breakfast style, 1 bedroom for rent or 2 bedrooms for rent, guest rooms. And then, the fees are here as well too, plus the $500 deposit. In terms of the breakdown of where, specifically honing in onto the annual entire guest home, guest suite license, I guess why $800? Where does this come from? And this is a sort of a rough breakdown, sort of covering the majority of it. In terms of, a sort of base business license fee for processing, our all other business license fee is $135. We're looking at this building inspection as well too, which is partly covered by that inspection fee that we're tacking on right now, but not entirely. And the additional review as well too, that online map goes through the GIS staff. We're looking, for these key documents around principal residency, etc., and the compliance monitoring, which is the main sort of aspect, the cornerstone of the City of Nelson's approach on this. Commercial zoning, just to touch on that, to be clear, when we're talking about the short-term rental regulations and the caps and the numbers that we have, we're only looking at the residentially zoned areas. So R1 through R6 and commercials, so C1 primarily downtown, right? They're taking out. We're also doing enforcement on those as well too. So if there's an above Baker Street store or apartment rather that ends up on Airbnb, we're looking at at them too. And if they don't have a license, following up with them, but not to get a short-term rental license per se, but rather a tourist accommodation license, which is the same as a hotel or hostel or whatnot in the commercial zone. So there are dwelling units downtown, right? Nelson Commons as well too, of course, is zoned C1. There aren't those same kind of restrictions. It's all commercial zoning, and under that tourist accommodation license fee. So the first year, the regulations came into effect on January 1st of 2017. And what happened in that first year? 50 licenses were issued, only 39 annual licenses, so quite a ways short of the cap of 110. Sort of where that 110 had come from originally, we were looking at a sort of a higher end estimate of what might have been going on, short Airbnb wise, back in the summer of 2016. You type in, people are still doing that, you type in Nelson, BC and Airbnb and you get, this really high number. That's not taking into account city limits. It's not taking into account what's commercially and residentially zoned. There's all kinds of inactive listings up on Airbnb, and there are some properties where they're covered under one license, but they have multiple rooms for rent or multiple listings that are kind of all different. So we kind of took that number and suggested a cap of 110. 2017, nowhere close. Host Compliance, that service that we hired to assist with identification, they were able initially right off the bat to identify about 80% of those, and which is the vast majority, and we were, as staff, able to identify the rest from there on in that Host Compliance wasn't able to. 20 warning letters were sent out in 2017. Most came into compliance right away after the letter, and I guess 18 tickets in total were issued. 12 were canceled because they came into compliance right away after the ticket was issued. It was a bit of a reminder for them, and 6 did stand. So far in 2018, we're going up a little bit in terms of license count over last year. 54 approved, 7 pending, only 1 summer license. So quite a bit less uptake on that this year than over last year. And we're already halfway through the summer, because the summer is defined as May 1st to August 31st. So total 62 licenses, including those pending applications. There's only one block down in an R3 part there of Silica Street that has reached that density cap of 3. A few others that have 2, but they're mostly pretty scattered. 6 warning letters have been sent, and 1 bylaw ticket has stood and has been paid so far this year. So in terms of comparing these years, so 2016, where we had just those older bed and breakfast license scheme, and 2017, 2018, licenses have shot way up from 19 up to 62 over the last couple of years. 2016, there really was an active enforcement. It was just complaint driven at that time. To my knowledge, there weren't any complaints that particular year. But last year, yeah, lots of tickets, lots of warning letters, and it's been definitely improvement in this year than over last year in terms of that. Most people are aware of the regulations at this point. So Nelson has been kind of treated as quite special. There's this sort of term that we've been throwing around of near 100% compliance. Let me explain this. What does that mean? Specifically, compliance in terms of holding a license. If you are actively soliciting guest stays on Airbnb or VRBO or HomeAway, everyone who's operating in the city within city limits, it holds a license. So that doesn't necessarily mean 100% compliance with every single line item in the bylaw in terms of their record keeping or of how many adults are allowed to stay in those premises and whatnot. But in terms of holding a license, yes. So and the near 100% is basically, well, yeah, people, they crop up from time to time, and it could take us a few weeks as well to identify them, send out warning letters, follow up, etc. And then, yeah, once the license has been issued, then if there were to be other violations with other parts of the bylaws, and that would be generally complaint based most of the time. And I don't really think we've gotten any complaints on licensed ones. So there's been, and I noticed as well too in the public survey, there were a number of comments as well too where people are saying, well, no, you don't. There's all kinds of things going on. So some of these reasons for misunderstanding of why, there's not everyone's like, yeah, we agrees that we have 100% compliance. Number one, I don't know, if there were to be informal short-term rentals out there where it's word of mouth, they technically are defined as, they're only stays of 31 days or less, but it's word of mouth or people send email chains around or something. We're not able to test that or check up on that, right? We're talking about short-term rentals that are publicly advertised on websites, like Airbnb and VRBO and Host Compliance. They monitor over 60 of these websites, and I think about 8 or 9 of them are being actively used here within the city of Nelson. Secondly, not all, as I said just before, not all listings on Airbnb are actually active. Some people kind of they used it once or twice, but they didn't ever delete their Airbnb listing. They're up there, but they're not accepting reservations. Nothing's happening. And number 3, in terms of what actually constitutes a short-term rental. So some of the complaints that we have heard, more heard than actually received, have been, it seems to be neighbors thinking that a busy household across the street must be a short-term rental. There's cars coming and going all the time, and I kind of do look into it, and I follow up, and I'm pretty sure that we're just talking about a family reunion or some big event. Lots of people are coming and going. Secondly, what that definition of short is. So if you go onto Kijiji or ilovenelson.com, there are some ads that say short-term rental or whatever. And this is in red here. This is one of the comments that was someone wrote on our survey a couple months ago. There's all these short-term rentals on Airbnb that are, they're far more 1 to a few month accommodations than long-term rentals. So that's the key, right? People, if they have a 1 or 2 month sublet, they'll call it a short-term rental. The provincial definition is, of a short-term rental is 31 days or under. So that doesn't fall under our regulations municipally. Anything over that month is residential tenancy. So just because it's called short-term rental doesn't mean it is. So there's been a lot of attention that's come as well too over the last year and a half. There's been some articles in the media. Host Compliance, they consider us to have one of the best, sort of most successful multifaceted regulatory programs in North America. So there was, so I was invited to give a webinar on that too. That was attended by across North America back in February. And there's been a whole long list of municipalities, mostly in British Columbia, but also in Ontario and Alberta, that have either contacted us to ask us about things, or who have cited the City of Nelson as a best practice in a council report or policy review or otherwise. So, second part of this presentation, thanks for bearing with me. March and April, we put out a couple surveys. So one of them was to the license holders. So everyone who had a license at that time, I think I included that number in the council report. It was about 50 or so who had 52 licensees at that time. 72 of them responded, or 27. And a separate survey was made available for the public, and we had that was advertised on social media, it was advertised in the newspaper, etc. 108 responses. Again, the license holder survey that was emailed individually to every single license holder with a unique code as well too, so that to avoid duplicate responses. Amongst the license holders, to get right into these survey results, 55.6% indicated that they were either satisfied or very satisfied with the current short-term rental license system. Two of them, so 11%, neutral, and so 6 respondents, so about 33%, said that it should either be a little less or just less restrictive than right now. It's quite the contrast from the public survey, where far fewer people were satisfied. You're looking at 27% or so who are satisfied or very satisfied, and a much higher number who thought that the rules should be more restrictive. So 24 plus 17 percent either they're very dissatisfied. 24 plus 9.5%. Sorry, that they should be more restrictive, and then 17 plus 13% who said either it should be less restrictive or a little less restrictive. So quite a few people in the community thinking, or it's more spread out all over the place, I should say. We also asked in the survey whether people thought that the current regulations were sort of living up to those 3 principles that we set out going forward at the beginning. And license holders actually, for the most part, thought that, that we're meeting those principles, particularly on safe accommodation. No one thought that we weren't meeting that goal. The public, on the other hand, was once again much more spread out, quite evenly. Safe accommodation, again, sort of the most popular, that 50% or 76% said, somewhat better in terms of safe accommodation. But 55% said not at all in terms of meeting local housing needs. 10% said yes, 22.5% somewhat. Just to kind of sample out some of the comments in terms of this perspective, this range of perspectives from the public survey in particular, there's some people who are, very unhappy that we have regulations on short-term rentals, that people should be able to short-term rental their home even if it's not their primary residence, one person wrote. Some people are satisfied. I think it's important to point that out too. And a couple of sample comments there. A couple people, it was interesting to me, they particularly pointed out that building code and building safety standard bit, something that they supported. And some people want more restrictions as well. So a couple of people the first couple of comments calling out the costs that it takes to be in compliance with taxation and building requirements and whatnot for a hotel versus a short-term rental. Last comment as well too, saying more should be done, or tourists don't need more protection, I guess, from the city. And we still have people as well too who participated in the survey who want no short-term rentals in the city at all. So there's, as you can see, I just wanted to take the sample of these just to sort of point out the range of perspectives that are out there. So final part, and the biggest part then, is the policy review. So there are a number of some lessons as well that we've learned in the last year and a bit, things that could be streamlined, that make them more administratively efficient, and a few sort of new ideas and whatnot that we would like to throw out there as well too, for possible amendments that we could do this summer. So on the license fee bit, So currently, every single license category is charged an additional $30 per year inspection fee on top of the license fee. So if you're coming to apply for the $800 annual license for a guest home, it's actually $830 because it's a separate fee. It's called out separately in the bylaw. And if you're coming for a 31-day license, it's an extra $30. Where that came from was the extraordinary building inspection fee in the fees and charges bylaw. If someone just calls us and says, I'm not applying for anything, I just want an inspection, is $100. So instead of charging people $100 every 3 years, we tried to say, well, what about charging them $30 every year instead? We instead would like to propose that perhaps this just be rolled in rather into the license fees. So they could just mean not having a separate, just leaving it as it is right now, just to keep the numbers cleaner. So leave the $800 fee, just a flat $800. Or if council were interested, instead, that it could just be rolled into the fee. So $830, for example, just add $30 to all the fees. The one issue as well too with it, in addition to being sort of confusing for a lot of people and having us having to explain it, is that we haven't got to the 3-year mark yet, where people are getting their second building inspection. But if people only get licensed for 1 year, then they only pay the $30 for their inspection, whereas people who stay 3 years actually keep renewing for 3 years in a row, then they actually get to that $90 mark. So it's not necessarily fair in that sense, hence why we propose to remove it. And the second proposal on the fees is to remove the deposit requirement. So that right now, license holders have to submit a $500 deposit. Where that came from back in 2016 when we were looking around at other cities' regulations, as I recall, Seashelt and Sun Peaks in particular, they had put on a $1,000 deposit requirement. And I had called them and asked, why and whether they thought that was worth doing and whether it made sense. And they were quite supportive of that, even the $1,000 deposit. In terms of if there's complaints and there's a need to issue bylaw tickets once someone has been licensed, it is easier to deduct that from a deposit than it is to actually go issue a ticket. We haven't had any of these problems here in Nelson, but the deposit, as you might not be surprised to hear, is highly unpopular. To put down $500 at the time of application. So we don't really see a need for it at this time, and hence we propose to remove it. So I'm going to go through these sort of slide by slide, issue by issue, and I'd be curious if there were any comments on either of these two items to give us some direction to come back, and hopefully in July already with amending bylaws.
Council? Any on these first two? You want to go point by point, like slide by slide is what you suggest?
Yeah, so on either of these two here.
No comments as yet?
Okay. This one is logical, but it's a little confusing to explain, the next one here. So there is, as you are aware, a 75% discount on water and sewer billing for secondary suites. And that was specifically a policy that council had put into place as an incentive for people to create long-term rentals. You have a house, create a suite, you don't have to, your water and sewer bill won't double. So at the time of the short-term rental regulations coming into place, there were the decision was made to not apply that 75% discount to secondary suites used for short-term rental, because the point of the whole program in the first place was to encourage long-term rentals. So in terms of actually implementing that, it's a little bit difficult on the administrative side for finance. What's happened in the past year is so people were supposed to renew by December 15th in order to sort of keep their place amongst the caps, but we're nowhere near the caps. So some people sort of laggard with their renewals. So then downstairs in finance are already working on the 2018 water and sewer bills, and then people sort of start straggling in with their renewals, and they are having to update the bills and reissue bills prorate way too often, and it's just not an efficient practice. So, so looking at this, we saw this as a problem on the administrative side. But still respecting the council decision to keep the 75% discount as an incentive for long-term rentals. What Development Services was able to come up with finance then was to sort of rejig things, the way that the fees are charged, and apply that 75% discount to any conforming second or short-term, long-term rental, doesn't matter. But at the time of application, when you pay the business license fee, then the fee, then you're charged a utility fee at that time. So on this first point here, on the proposed changes under the lower the guest suite license fee, this is, it's a proposal, it's an option to look at. I guess recognizing that a guest home and a guest suite are two different things. A lot of the guest homes licensed for entire home in Nelson are quite large homes, where short renting the entire home, whereas a suite is typically it's a secondary suite. It could be a basement suite. It's not quite on the same scale, including from a building inspection standpoint and whatnot. So the proposal then was to lower that, so to have two different, guest home 800, guest suite 500. But then it said at the time of application to charge $700 for the utility fee. So that means that right now in 2017, if you came to apply for you wanted your secondary suite to be a short-term rental, you would have come in and you would have been charged $800, say in January, and then February you get this really big water and sewer bill, 200%, right? 100% for your home and 100% for your suite. So which works out to be what is that? $1,664 altogether. Your business license fee plus the fact that you're not getting that discount. So instead, in 2019 potentially, someone would come in for the same reason, and they would pay $1,200 upfront. However, in February, when these bills go out, they will get the 75% discount, which they didn't get this year. So the net savings from 2018, this year, to 2019, if this were to go forward for an applicant, would be $448. So we're rejigging things. It'll be a little bit to explain, but a little bit less. Given that we're considering a lower license fee from $300. And there's a discrepancy then of $148 between the current water sewer billing and this fee, but it's a lot less administratively cumbersome as well too. So that was
Anyone? Questions? Well, I have a comment about this one actually. I get that it's easier administratively, but I do think that we're looking at it a little bit backwards. So the discount is for long-term rental. So now what we're talking about is short-term rentals and giving them a discount on this as well.
But basically reversing the discount. We're shifting the way that we're charging it.
Shifting the way that we're charging it, but then it still comes out to a $448 subsidy for their
maybe I should break that down. So it's for the utilities, it's $148 compared to this year. That $448 includes lowering the business license fee from this year to next year, so that there's to have a gap, I guess, between a guest suite and a guest home. So yeah, so $448 less than this year, but the utility discount then is just $148, or is $148, I should say.
I guess my concern is that we're losing the sense of discount associated with a long-term rental, and I do have some concerns with that, but continue, please. Think about that some more.
Yeah.
Councillor Sherba?
Yeah, that, we looked at that as the incentive for people to have long-term rentals rather than a short-term rental. So I guess we won't know. Well, we'll have to look at that. I agree with Acting Mayor Valerie Warmington.
To be clear, what the idea here is that when we have people going in and out and us moving them out of categories of having the discount and then putting them in another category and then sending them a new invoice and then change the invoice if they change back. The idea being here that if you've got a suite that qualifies for the discount, you would continue to have that. So we monitor that piece, but then we would have this additional fee that you would pay that bridges the gap so that you have actually lost that if you move from having a long-term rental and you're going to join the short-term rental group. So what it does is it allows staff downstairs, the ins and the outs and the rebilling will all be just dealt out of one. So if you come back, then part of it is the connection with all of the different clients and classifications that we have for sewer and water having to be adjusted. You're now just dealing with those people that are changing to have out of the long-term rental. They no longer qualify for the discount, so we have a way of charging them that additional revenue. And if they take it out or someone changes, we got the same account to reverse that out of. And then that just leaves the accounts for the properties all very the same.
Yeah, I do understand that, but we are still reducing the overall cost by $448 per year, which is in an environment where we're getting pushback from commercial tourist accommodators that it isn't fair. Did you have something, Councillor Daly? No?
Just that it's pretty confusing. I think we've got to find a better way, maybe.
Sure.
I think part of it is the explanation, and if we had, I think what would have been good maybe when I see it is if we had just a comparison. I think the council would have been able to see, here's what you would have done previous year, here's what you're doing now. Again, the idea of dropping from 800 to 500, I think, is some of the work that maybe Alex will talk to in a bit. That's the part maybe is concerning you more. I think we looked at the difference between having a whole house for rent or having a suite or one room for rent. Those were both paying the same. So I think that's part of where he was trying to find some equities there, that if you're renting your whole house versus handing out a room. And so try to make that a bit more reasonable.
Okay.
All right, so we can look at that in terms of I guess the concept of moving from discount to utility fee. I would stress that this would be a very good thing for the administration of billing. So it's, again, applying the discount, but basically reversing the discount if you do a short-term rental. It would just make things a little more streamlined. Shall I move on?
Yes, please.
Okay. So summer licenses, as you saw a few minutes ago, not very popular. A little bit last year, not very popular this year. The concept for the summer-only license, which is unique to Nelson, was some of the feedback that we heard back in 2016 where, people who have a property and they rent to students, right? Particularly Selkirk College students throughout the school year. So September, April, those students, it's great thing to do, to house students. Those students may disappear in the summer and you don't live at that property because it's a rental property. So how could you make use of that in the summer? The two sort of downsides, or might not be the way of putting it, but negative, less useful parts about it. Number one, again, little uptake, one so far this year, halfway through the summer. Number two, we've since then also received some feedback that sure, there are a lot of Selkirk College students, but there are also other school post-secondary college schedules out there in Nelson. We have there are the UBC folks, there are the arts colleges, the Chinese medicine school, etc. So people were sort of interested, expressed interest in sort of working more with that. So the concept then came up of a 4-month license. So we're talking, the summer license is 4 month, but a 4-month license instead that would be just a bit more flexible. So you could do it for the summer, as we define it now, or you could pick sort of 4 months throughout the year of just consecutive sort of 31-day periods. You could come in January and say, yep, I am going to Airbnb in March, July, August, and then December. sort of conceptually at least, and obviously up for discussion then, is the summer-only licenses don't have that principal residency requirement. Again, going back to that student housing scenario. So, so then we're looking at, well, then there's the 4-month license to kind of basically replace the summer license instead of also not applying the principal residency requirement to that license. So just a bit more flexible in that regard.
Well, that was one of the things I was wondering about this when I was looking through the package, whether or not this idea of increasing that to 4 different terms would mean that people didn't have to be there on the premises, and what I guess you've heard from the community about that, like what the reasoning would be for that. I hear that there's low uptake on the summer option now, and people do like to go away and make a bit of cash or whatever. I just, wondering where this idea is coming from specifically.
Yeah, so a bit more of that, when you say people who are sort of coming and going, but it's not like they take the entire summer off per se, but perhaps they have more vacation than 2 weeks of vacation per year, and they're coming and going at different times. There's also, this license then would also sort of fit, there were those 2 exemptions back in January, where you have a situation where someone has multiple properties, for different reasons, but this would still prevent you from buying up a property and Airbnb it 365 days per year. So for the type of person who was partially there some of the time, there was the other one who the other case then that was presented to you in January, who was because we've got these locums who come and stay. That's the kind of, and wants to be able to short-term rental for like the month or 2 months in between having those in order to make the project substantially financially viable.
Can I have a follow? So is there so maybe I'm getting confused between it being your primary residence and having to live on the property. So for this proposed 4-month scattered 4-month option, it's still supposed to be your primary residence?
No. And we only have we only do talk in the bylaws about principal residency. There isn't a requirement that you actually have to be there on the property whenever there's a guest there. That is not standing right now. If you look at the guest room licenses, that would normally be the case because we're just talking about a room or something like a bed and breakfast. And in terms of guest home, well, they're renting the whole home. So those are situations where they're just not there. A few situations maybe they themselves stay in the secondary suite in the basement, and they Airbnb the main home.
So I guess it's turned out mostly that they lived on the premises because it was their primary residence. Like, so if you're renting, if you have a full year one, then where else are you living if you've registered, if you're getting the homeowner's grant for this?
Yeah, there's a number of stories that we hear. So there's people who do own a couple of properties and they declare in multiple ways that their home in Nelson is their principal residency. There's one individual I can think of who has another place out in the regional district, and they stay here in Nelson in that home when they can because they like it and it's close, and for financial reasons then when they do get a booking, then they vacate and just commute from out of town into town for however many days those guests are staying, and that gives them income to.
And it's a better grant to declare a higher income property for your primary residence than to declare a cottage on the lake or something.
Correct.
Councillor Daly.
So kind of a hybrid of a long-term rental and a short-term rental. But the problem I'd have with this is that, that can happen in commercially zoned area now. That you could rent it out short-term and not be your principal residence. You could do that. And the concern is that that we're talking about residential areas, that we want to remain residential areas, meaning the people that are in the house, own the house, are sort of supervising their guests. And so when you allow people to have a home that they're not there to supervise their guests, it becomes a commercial operation. You could be having a family reunion every weekend next door all summer long. And that's not fair to people who are living in a residential area. So I wouldn't see you'd get support for this, from me anyway, for that reason.
Sure. So in terms of, to follow up on that then, the summer license, I don't know, in that case, if there isn't support then for sort of shifting this then, we might keep the summer licenses on the books, but maybe at least for another year or so. So far, not very popular. Again, that the summer licenses are currently exempt from the principal.
Are they?
Yes. Yeah. Again, for that student housing scenario reason there. But there's only one right now.
So the only difference is going from 131 day to a 4 month.
No, so the summer licenses, right? It's 4 months consecutive, May 1st to August 31st, to be able to spread it out.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Councillor Purcell again?
Why can't it still have to be a primary residence? Like, do the scattered 4 month thing, but still be like, okay, you want to go away or what, like whatever your plans are. Why can't it still
Because
be your primary residence?
they're long-term rentals without them living there.
What?
The rest of the year, they're a long-term rental for students that they don't live there. You don't need that requirement.
But we're talking about not having the summer ones. We're talking about having scattered.
Yeah, for
Right.
and I don't have statistics on what's actually playing out in terms of long-term tenancy. But again, long-term tenancies are anything over 31 days, right? So, you look at Kijiji, and there are a number of 3 month. They're often more sublets, right? It's someone who has like a 1 year lease, and they're going to disappear for a couple months. It's not just landlords who specialize in renting out for 2 months at a time. So I guess but it's the concept, I suppose, is sort of about filling in those gaps, right? And also about sort of treating things a bit differently. So compared to the two exemptions then that were granted for this calendar year while we figured things out on that principal residency requirement. And we were trying to look at options then. Well, how could we sort of create a license that would work? So that sort of normalize, maybe that's not the best word, standardize what council already approved for them, at least for this year, as an exemption, versus having to go for exemptions on a regular basis and kind of, exempting people from bylaw, which is...
Can you foresee ways this could be taken advantage of, maybe in ways that I can't right now? Like, you've heard all
Sure.
the exceptions. You've been talking to people and understand how the enforcement has been going. Like, what's the weasel factor in this?
Kevin and I talked about this. What Kevin pointed out was you can make a lot of money doing short-term rental, right? And in theory, if you were able to rent every single day in 4 months, you chose the magic 4 months time slots that everyone wants to come to Nelson in, and you rented every single day, you would make more money in those 4 months than if you had a long-term tenant, or is just as much, maybe not more. That's a third of the year, right? Just as much, I would on average. So that said, I don't really see much evidence suggesting that people do have consistent guest stays. Some of what Ashley hears at the front counter is that for a lot of people it's been quite a bit slower this year, it's hard to imagine people having that. So, but that is one scenario, for sure.
Okay, maybe we'll continue to go forward
Sure.
to the end of your presentation.
Okay. So this is, kind of related to sort of consideration then related to this past conversation here around are there any, so again going back to there were those two exemptions that were granted by council in January. Are there any situations where where council would be would rather sort of delegate that authority to staff to look at things case by case. If there are extenuating circumstances or special circumstances of some kind where staff would be able to either relax a parking requirement in a situation where there is ample parking with no risk of impact on parking availability for neighbors, which maybe would be like 5% of the time, where that you would actually find that kind of situation where there'd be no impact on neighbors. But there are certainly a couple situations that would be like that, or again with the principal residency requirement, instead of having them come to council. So that's just something for consideration, which we would appreciate any feedback on, if we should try and work on that.
And is it really just around parking that you're looking to be?
Parking, well, parking and principal residence, those are really the only two issues that some people have had with the regulations. Everything else you can kind of meet. We're not obviously going to vary. We're not looking at variances from the building code or something like that. But those are the two things that people come in and say, I have this exceptional circumstance. For the parking one, for example, the principal, you saw is council, 2 cases of the principal residency bit. In terms of parking, right, one case where a couple properties actually where they've come in and they have, a lot of parking on their boulevard, which looks and feels like their driveway, but it doesn't actually meet a parking requirement because it's not within their property lines. That's the kind of situation where it's definitely a lot of work, if you can define it right, where it's a lot of work to bring it to council for a variance. It's technically parking on a city boulevard, but no one else is using it because everyone assumes that's their driveway, for example.
So can I just provide a little bit of clarity here about what we're trying to achieve is that we don't ever want to bring exceptions forward to council where you're not enforcing your bylaw. Legally, the only place that it says you can do that is a development variance permit, right? So that legally says you can vary your bylaw because property is different, land is different, that sort of thing. Other than that, we want to enforce what's in the bylaw. The bylaw is the bylaw. If there's an exception about something, then that is a policy decision. Does that need to come back to council, and does that exception apply to all? Otherwise, we enforce the bylaw. So there are some peculiarities with this that is different than traffic and that sort of things. But so we're trying to find a way which we would have to write into the bylaw where there are certain things that you would delegate that authority for a decision. Perhaps we'd attach a policy to it that says, here are the things that we agree staff can deal with, but have to write it in the bylaw in such a way that says, under these circumstances, we delegate the authority to staff, that people have the right to have that reconsidered by council. But we need to get some regulations in there so that people are staying with your policy, within your policy decision.
Comments? Go ahead, Mayor Kozak.
I think that makes sense to delegate some of that to staff with the appropriate guidance. I know that if there is a dispute that can't be resolved, or someone feels that policy has been applied, maybe not as they would like, they can always come to a council and appeal. But I think in terms of passing on that some of that, I think that's a sound practice. If you have good policy in place, then it's pretty straightforward, and staff can move on that. So I'm in favor of that.
I would agree. I'm wondering if we're, sorry?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm wondering if we have enough comfort around principal residence and what we're doing there, because it's so key to ensuring our long-term rental.
Yeah.
Whether we want to kind of sit on that piece for a bit until we have better understanding, but I'll hear what council has to say. Councilor Daly, did you have something?
Well, we're not in a business meeting to discuss this, but that we are is interesting. And I would be curious about what the policy of this council is as far as Airbnbs are. does staff have an impression that council wants to maintain long-term rentals as well as understand, which is why we had residents it has to be their primary residence. So they're there, and we also gave residents the choice of, well, you can do an Airbnb, or rent to a student or long-term tenant, or share your home however you want, to not be over-regulating that. But what we were very clear on was not wanting people to come in and make a business of Airbnb by buying homes and creating Airbnbs that out of properties that could be used for rental properties or someone to buy and own and raise a family in, because it can change the nature of a community. So whatever that policy is that you're asking for, I'm okay that staff can make decisions. I just want them to make the decisions based on clear direction from council about what it is we're trying to create. The gray area is we've offered a bit of a hybrid. And I know you've even come back with an exemption around a homeowner wanting to, that we went with, which didn't keep with our policy. So I think council is a little confused on where we are in that. We need to be clear that long-term rental is the priority, that Airbnbs people need the freedom to have a choice and have a safe place and that has to be safe for their guests. But it's not something we're encouraging. In fact, we're encouraging the other through our endorsement of 75% utility discount, which should not be anywhere near the Airbnb, because we're not encouraging Airbnb. We are encouraging secondary suites. So I don't know how you put that in a policy so you're clear, and is that the direction from all of council? I don't know.
I don't think that was ever, I don't think that was ever a dispute. I think that we were really clear about the purpose for even having a short-term rental bylaw was just that there was deep concern for the preservation of neighborhoods and for the need and a recognition of the need for longer-term housing. So if that needs to be stated explicitly, I don't think that I don't recall hearing any member of council not supporting that philosophically, but maybe
Yeah, so that just needs to be put in the policies, then staff can be guided by that. And that's what we need to be looking at.
All right. Next. Back to, so still on the topic, I guess, of principal residency then. Sort of, I guess the background then on our path of where we ended up is, so what a lot of cities did, sort of had already in place when we were looking at this in 2016, was they would say, okay, you have to be principal resident, but they didn't really, they weren't really focused on that. It was very easy to sort of prove principal residency in those cities. You could bring a phone bill or something. But then they would say, well, okay, you can't Airbnb for more than 60 or 120 days per year. Which can be difficult to track. So we went a different direction, and we said, okay, we're just going to be a bit more strict in terms of principal residency, and not sort of be splitting hairs with how many days people are renting for. However, just as a safeguard, though, there aren't any cases that I could cite right now of that I have seen that have been brought to my attention where there is someone who's completely abusing the principal residency thing, where they've completely falsely declared a home. They never live there. Perhaps they're not even there that much, actually, but it is their only home or something, and they're just big travelers, something like that. But to put as a sort of a safeguard, so to say, in our back pocket of bylaws, to have a maximum number of days that a property could be advertised per year in the case of a guest home, just as a safeguard against sort of very exceptionally blatant abuses of that. That if it's around 100 and, so basically half of the year. And if we were to find a property, someone, either we find or someone brings to our attention where, you can see these people have been Airbnb-ing this every single day the whole year. That's not their principal residency. They're not there. Then we'd have something very easy and clear to fall back on. So that would be an option. We're at 182 again, looking at a half year. If you're declaring the homeowner's grant on the form that you sign, you are declaring to the provincial government that you are there most of the time. This is the place. There's a little bit of wording to it, where you regularly cook your meals and you're there, and you're there at least half of the year. So it's not sort of pushing that further than the provincial government already does, but it is putting that, the meaning of principal residency as the province understands it into our bylaws, so that we can more directly enforce that if need be.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. And then a possible change. So right now, in terms of that proof, what the bylaw says is proof of principal residency. And our general rule of thumb, and in most of the cases, what we're looking at is the homeowner's grant. And most of the time, people who've come in to apply, they've already been there for a few years. They've been here for many years, and that's easy. We just look at that right away, no problem. There have been a few cases, more than I would have anticipated this past year, where people have just bought a home in the last few months, and then they come in for a license. And so we do work with them to sort of cobble together and triangulate a few different pieces to this, right? The bylaw does say proof of principal residency. And if these people come in and they say, yes, this is my principal residency, what can we find in terms of documentation? Sometimes this can be very nuanced, particular insurance documents, sort of combined with things from their employer, etc. So we do our best with that, and under the understanding that, well, this is their first year. The next year they are going to have the homeowner's grant. One possibility, just for consideration, then, which we'd appreciate any comment on, is do we make that more explicit in the bylaw? Would we put in the bylaw that you have to have the homeowner's grant? For example, this sort of baseline proof of principal residency. And if what that would mean is if you just bought that home a few months ago, then you would be excluded until you've been there for up to a year and you're able to claim that homeowner's grant and prove that.
I'm okay with that.
Well, I also think that typically your driver's license is, not everyone has one, but is your primary. You're required by law to put your primary address. No,
I had that issue I was telling you about. This guy's got a driver's license with a post office box at the Home Depot. It's on his driver's license. It's on his driver's license.
Interesting.
And yeah, you can get mailing addresses on that too. I was very hesitant about that, to be honest, from the get-go about the driver's licenses. Other cities do take that, but just from my own experience of people I've known, and for rental places I've lived where you get something from ICBC, that person lived there 5 years ago, they just never updated it. It's very easy to change that address as well too. So we did want to look for evidence, pieces of evidence that, like from Revenue Canada combined with other pieces of evidence that this is a bigger deal. It's either federal government, taxation, employers. You've declared to your insurance company, this is my primary residence. If you make a false insurance declaration, that's more your problem than the city's if something were to go wrong. So that kind of thing, and stay away from the utility bills and whatnot.
Well, basically, your first year, you're going to believe them whatever they bring in and say that, and you're going to see it the next year. I'm okay with that.
So okay with that, is council thinking more about okay with the status quo of just or of being more rigid about the homeowner's grant?
We trust them.
Okay.
How else are you going to do that?
Suggesting trust them like always, or are you
No,
saying
no,
be
you
flexible the
still have
first
to
year, but
yeah, you
after
need to
that
get.
it's
Just the first year is the issue.
Yeah.
And then you're going to get the homeowner's grant. Use the homeowner's grant in the wording.
And a hydro
Mayor
bill or
Kozak?
something would definitely prove your residency.
Sorry, Councillor Sherba.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Councillor Mayor Kozak.
Yeah. So in the instance of homeowners grants, if there is a couple that's living together,
Yes.
common law, and they have more than one property, they get, can either, both people apply for homeowners grants on separate properties?
I had noted down to bring that up from the public participation. I think Mr. McClure might be more familiar with this than I am.
I mean, again, it's possible,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we are based on many of these things. That's why when you sign off on your homeowner grant, you certify that you are being honest and forthright. But that's all that we have to stand on. If people are not honest and forthright, we would have to catch them. There would have to be something to catch them up. There would be something that, would trigger that. But I mean, again, it's much like when you do your tax return. What you put down in the numbers, in a lot of ways, is up to you. You're your accountant, right? I mean, it's based on your approval.
Imply cohabitation though?
Well, again, if you're common law, okay, we're living together in one spot, and we have another spot, and we're renting it out. House is in your name.
Right.
House is in my name.
Right.
We fill out the homeowner's grant. It's up to your conscience as to how or whether or not you claim it.
Thank you.
Aside from the common law issue, knowing this was coming up, you can look on your homeowner grant, and it does give a description, a meaning of permanent residence, and it says where you reside, normally reside, where you normally have your meals, where you keep your clothes, and your place where you live. And so it's really clear in that, and if you're actually not abiding by that, you're breaking a law, and you can be charged with fraud, and it's $10,000 fine or whatever. So someone that's taking a risk of doing that is taking a big risk for someone that might report that, and maybe someone is doing that and taking that risk, and they'll be made an example. Maybe, I don't know, but it's quite clear that when you say in your homeowner's grant that this is your primary residence, because you're benefiting, it's actually fraud if you don't live there as your primary residence. And they said where you normally reside, which means where you normally reside and where you take your meals.
You have to check the box. You have to check the box, and that you certify that as best of your knowledge, you're giving correct information. So,
Yeah.
I mean, you sign that off. So again, if we find out or if we catch things, that's where you go through that process.
Yep.
But there isn't on the other side. Unless someone said, unless maybe they broke up and someone wanted to maybe
It could be a transition time.
Okay.
All right, we're almost there. Almost at the end.
A lot of detail.
A lot of details in here.
It's on this one.
So the next item here, I think this might be their third last one, on building inspections. I would consider this a little bit of housekeeping, a semi-housekeeping item. Again, we have this requirement. I think there's only been a couple cases in the last year, but of this where the house has been, built within the previous 3 years, or there's been substantial major renovations, and the building official was just there, and then they apply for a short-term rental license, a number of months later, or even a year later, that falls within the 3 years. So, our building officials are quite busy, and it just, okay.
That's common sense.
Go ahead.
Well, I would just say that the property's had a full inspection, not
Yes.
in it, because you could have been inspected for a deck.
Again,
or a
major.
bathroom. So you need to put full inspection. If it's covered, it's covered. That's
Sure.
all.
Yeah, and we can clarify that as well too. Again, so not as an automatic right to have that inspection waived, but at the approval, the discretion of the building official.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So a few other items here. Number one on just the guest rooms. I won't actually talk about that now. Maybe at a future council meeting, because I think we actually have the definitions we need at this time. Number two is just clarifying in the business license bylaw that is clarification that a license won't be issued if you have outstanding fines. You are fined for not having a license. Now you come in, you have to pay those fines before we issue the license. Number three is currently only one 31-day license is allowed per year. and again, the 31-day license, you do need to be the principal resident for. Yeah. So this is kind of more of it's tailored around vacations and people going away and or sort of flexibility, which is what the key concept of Airbnb and home sharing is supposed to be. So allowing 2 of those per year if someone wants to would be consideration. Then prorating number 4 was consciously decided at the time of when these bylaws were adopted. From July 1st on, we prorate business licenses to 50%. So if you have $200 business license, if you apply it on July 1st or after, it's $100, half off, because it's only for half of the calendar year. The decision was made to not prorate them for short-term rental licenses. We've had people in the last year and this last fall who come in and, it's September and they meet all the other criteria and their principal residency and whatnot. And then they're expected to pay $800, the full rate, for 4 months. And that's sort of their only option. Either they wait till January and get an annual license that they'd have. So where 70% is a little bit different from the other business licenses, considering the amount of work and still administrative work that goes into the short-term rental licenses, but still sort of providing some flexibility on that to not charge the full rate if you're coming in October. Any comments on that at this time? Finally, just reserving sort of, again, a little bit of a housekeeping bit on sort of reserving right to the city to request booking records directly from the listing platform. So just in terms of how it's worded now, we haven't actually had to do this. We haven't had that kind of complaint. But you have to keep your guest records, and that could be sort of a handwritten notebook in your shoebox. So this to sort of clarify that, if you have a listing on Airbnb and on VRBO, we'd actually like you to go log on to those websites and print out what they provide as guest records, and not just your notebook from your shoebox. So finally, I just wanted to cover, I think this is the final bit here on parking requirements. I'm going to do this quickly because we aren't actually proposing changes, but again, there's this table on parking requirements for short-term rentals, the minimum you have to have for the property. So a guest home, which is what quite a few of them are, you do have to have 2 spaces or 1 space in R3, which is the same parking requirement as for a new single-family dwelling in those zones, respectively. Even though we're not proposing changes right now, as staff on parking, I do want to bring this up because parking is always, it's parking. It's always being talked about. There are a number of people in the survey wrote about this, and some people saying you shouldn't have a parking requirement because people are getting by right now without. If it's an existing non-conforming home, why should they have to have one just because it's a short-term rental? Second comment is the exact opposite view of there's more cars coming and going because it's an Airbnb. People also commented on how, a resident that doesn't have off-street parking, they are more likely to know about the winter parking rules, whereas someone who comes in for the weekend for a family reunion in December doesn't know about the parking rules, and therefore there really should be some kind of off-street parking for a short-term rental. So license holders were overall happy with the parking requirements. Are only 12%. 2 people indicated that they should be lowered. And the public was sort of generally content with them, one could say, with only 22% saying that there should be lower or no parking requirements for short-term rentals. So hence why we're going to propose just leave it the same. It is a barrier for a lot of for applications, which I should stress why I do want to talk about it, is that people do come in, they have an existing non-conforming home, there's no real way to provide that parking, and we have to deny them for that reason. And they say, well, there's lots of parking on my street, we get by on our day-to-day basis, but as a general rule, there seems to be a feeling out there that short-term rentals are different in terms of parking demand than long-term dwelling units.
When an inspection's done, for the purpose of a license, does the inspector look at the parking spots, presumably? Does he look at then, or she look at then, the area where they might park on the street? If you're like next to a school and you've got you know, a whole road not being used, it would make sense that you'd say, well, there's lots of parking here. Or, no, we're in a very densely silica type situation. There is, as soon as someone leaves, someone's pulled in. Is that taken into consideration?
Right now, no, not at all, right? It's the same standard, it's in the off-street parking bylaw, it's the same standards. The parking spaces have to be 6 meters by 2.75 meters within your property lines, as if you were building a new home. It's within the property lines. Again, as I spoke about earlier in terms of that possibility for staff, for delegating some authority to staff on that, we could craft wording to sort of address those kind of unique situations where it wouldn't have to come as a variance to council. But no, right now it's quite strict. All right. Finally, sorry, there was one more thing just for information. You may have heard, just as an update on that, you may have heard back in February, I believe it was, the province came to an agreement with Airbnb, and only Airbnb, not all the other sites, which does matter, that Airbnb at some point is going to be collecting PST and the MRDT, the tourism tax. We don't know when. That was announced back in February, and I've contacted the province. I don't know when that's actually going to take effect, but it will at some point. And after having spoken with Diana Dukes at Nelson Cooney Lake Tourism, she is fine or actually supportive of removing that current requirement for Nelson Cooney Lake Tourism after that time, once that comes to effect, because most of the activity is happening on Airbnb. So at least giving that a try and seeing what the results are like, giving people the benefit of the doubt on that, that if, you know, if they were to be advertising entirely off of it, outside of Airbnb, Diana said, well, let's, you know, encourage them to get a membership anyway as part of their sort of community commitment to tourism and whatnot. But most days, most people are advertising on Airbnb. They would be charged these taxes, and let's see how that happens. So when that does actually take into effect, we do plan on coming forward with an amendment to remove that requirement and just let Airbnb collect those taxes and remit them to the province. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any final questions before we let Alex go? Good. We'll look forward to seeing this come forward.
Okay.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks.
I'd like to thank Alex for all of the time and energy and effort that you put into this file. It's and for other communities have really begun to come to rely on the work that Nelson has done. And I think although some people might have some difficulty with this bylaw, I think by and large the majority of the people that have have short-term rentals, as well as homeowners here in the community, it's providing some good balance. And I'm really glad that we said what we said we would review it in the year, and we are, and that's great. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Council, we will be going back in camera, but for the moment, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Councillor Daly, Councillor Purcell. Thanks, everyone.
Can I just ask a quick question? Will there be another opportunity for people to provide comments and feedback?